Hi, everyone. So firstly, thanks to the Creative Mornings team for inviting me. I'm Wendy, a product designer that's based in Singapore. So the topic for today is making, and I would like to share about making as a forgotten design method. So this is my team. I founded this studio in Singapore with 3 other co-founders. There's 4 of us here. Sebastian Albadi, he's from Spain, and we have a Barcelona office. And Gustavo Maggio, he's from Argentina, Buenos Aires. 3 years ago, he relocated to Singapore. So we've been running a studio out of Singapore and Barcelona. We're called Outofstock because we met in Stockholm at a design competition. So Gabriel and myself from Singapore, and back then Sebastian and Gustavo were representing Spain in this competition. So the 4 of us, we mainly do furniture and interior design projects in Singapore and also in Europe. We exhibited in Milan and Cologne and Tokyo. And despite these experiences in interior projects, our background lies in product design. And so object making and talking to craftsmen is something very central to our passion. So when we were given the topic make, immediately we think about something like an action, something to do with one component of the design process. It's something that we were taught in school. So you have the ideation, conceptualization, research, and then you have the quick prototyping, in which in some ways it's about not thinking, just doing it. But 7 years on in the industry, we come to realize that there's a lot more to the word make, and making is really an ongoing process, a certain way of approaching design, and also a forgotten design method. So this is something quite close to my heart. When I was young, my mom is a tailor, and she works out of home. And up to 15 years ago, I would have many strangers coming to her house and bring the fabrics that they've chosen, and she would be taking their body measurements, and they would spend a lot of time discussing what kind of clothes they want to design. And it could be office clothes, or it could be a wedding gown. But you don't see these things anymore. Globalization and consumerism has taken over. So this kind of conversation with a maker and having such an involvement in creating the object that you're wearing is no longer so visible. And so making is really about a conversation. And which brings me to the project that I'll be sharing today. It's called A Weight of Blue. It's a self-initiated project, so there's no clients involved, and it was something that we really wanted to do out of our passion. So when many people think about craftsmen, they imagine this image of a man that is sculpting something painstakingly, which may or may not be true. So I would like to bring you with me to see how craftsmen work in Singapore. So that's Mr. E. He's a metal lathe craftsman, probably one of the last few craftsmen that are based in Singapore. And he works out of a shop house workshop. So as a designer, when you get into the industry, often you were not really taught how you converse with makers. You come up with drawings, and especially in Singapore, where most of the factories are not here anymore, you would just be preparing a technical drawing and you send it via email and you wait for the prototype to arrive. And so that was how usually we work with a craftsman too. Maybe we would go down with a drawing, talk to him, and then we leave until he's ready with a prototype. But for this particular piece, I decided to stay around and observe him for the whole day. And that's when I realized there was this certain myth about craft. So as you can see in the video, he spent most of his time preparing the machine before crafting the piece. So he was choosing the right cutting bit, he was sharpening the bit to the right angle, hearing the sound of the machine if it sounds right, oiling the parts and checking the speed. And basically when I was there the whole day, he didn't do anything until the very last hour. And when he was finally lading the piece, he wasn't even using his hands. The machine just ran on its own. And so that's what I learned from him. He spent 2 days preparing the machine and 1 hour lading the actual piece. And so once you're set the machine and prepare the stage for making, everything else comes naturally. And it's often this preparation that we don't really see. And I guess the same can be said about design. There's also a certain myth that designers are creative and somehow ideas just come about because they know different design methods. But it's also not always the case. Like often we feel rather dried or constrained by projects or cost limitations. And so for the four of us, we know clearly that sometimes we do need to set the stage, just like Mr. E, to prepare ourselves the perfect canvas on which we are able to create, and which is what we did. So we work out of 2 offices and sometimes even 3, and we realized that the only way for us to sort of redesign the way we work is to take a short sabbatical. And the best way is for us to meet physically in one place, no more Skype and Basecamp, and to work in the most analog way within the walls of a workshop. And so that's where we went in February this year. So we went to a glass factory in the depths of the Bavarian forest, which is 450 years old. It was really amazing. So you can see that's the car that we drove down from Munich, and looking down at the landscape and all those little buildings over there, that's where the factory is. When you see a landscape like that in winter, it's almost like you're on a holiday mood. But for us, we were very clear about what we wanted to achieve. So we wanted to have a series of glass exploration in which they are created with a very deep understanding of the craft. We only have 6 or 7 days there. There will be no or minimal internet, and we have already booked 3.5 hours of glass blowing time with the craftsmen to create the prototypes. And on the last day, we want to bring the prototypes with us back because otherwise shipping is too expensive. So these were our clear guidelines. It wasn't a holiday. And also just to make sure that we really do create when we're there, we set a very tight framework. We know we are only really productive for 1.5 hours and then we are brain dead. So we set the day into segments, 1.5 hours each, in which includes hiking in the forest, because the forest is very central to this glass craft, sharing moments, and also moments when we can be on our own to think of ideas, open and close modes. And also setting tasks to everyone to document what is happening every day. And we follow this very, very closely. So that's us, the 4 of us, while I'm taking a picture. And the owner of this factory is also the owner of the forest land and the baron of the town. So behind the factory, there was all this wood that has been logged, mostly beech wood, and they are left to rest for about a year before they can be used. So exploring that was very important for us, and going to the forest, and the snow is really, really thick. And also designing within the hotel room, we were just pinning up our sketches and looking at the materials that we brought with us. And the day before the prototyping, we were sewing the mousse. We brought these textiles that are able to withstand high temperature, and we were just using anything we can find, even the dustbin inside the hotel room. And just before the glass blowing, this is Benedict, the owner and the baron. And so we're running through the concepts with him, and he's explained to us what can be done or not. And so this is one of the first exploration. So as I was saying, wood is very central to glass craft, and wood is probably the best material to complement glass. Wherever you go in any factory, you will realize that the kind of glass that you can blow with wood mold is very different from the ones that are blown from metal mold. Even if you look at Itala from Finland, if you were to find a vintage piece that are produced 40 or 50 years ago and you compare with a new production piece, it's very different. And the reason is that the mold is actually wet in a tank, and so it's really soaked in water before they blow the glass in. And when the hot glass goes in, it creates a layer of steam. And so this steam is sandwiched between the glass and the wood. And so the glass is not really in contact with the wood. And it's this steam that creates this amazing quality. And so naturally, when we walked by this river stream that's in front of the factory, and we saw the branches that has fallen in, we immediately thought, what can we do with it? And one of the first thought was, how long has the branch been lying there? And how many winters has it seen? And how wet it really is? And when we finally take it out after a lot of struggle, it turned out that the branch was really quite long. It was more than 2 meters long. We were afraid that it would dry up, so when we brought it back to the hotel room, we left it out in the balcony and buried it in snow. And the next day, we brought it into the factory. We cut a small piece and we experimented with it. We call this collection wood. When we first came out with this concept, Benedict told us that it was not possible because the glass is really hot. It's blowing at about 600 degrees Celsius, and it takes about 3 to 4 hours for it to finally cool down in a cooling furnace to room temperature. And in that 3 or 4 hours, the wood constantly burns. So he believes that when the glass emerges from the cooling furnace, it would be ashes. So we're really happy when we finally took it out and we actually found pieces of wood that's still inside, like in charcoal pieces. So in some ways, we managed to bring the Bavarian forest back with us with this piece. And yeah, so it actually managed to sustain. So it means that the branch must have been in the water for a long time to be so wet to withstand. Another thing that we noticed when we were in the workshop was the different craftsmen that were involved in the process. And Joseph is a glass cutter, so he cuts all the glass pieces before they are finally grinded and at the edges and then sent to the designer. So on his table, you may notice all these beautiful organic pieces of glass. And they are just cut and thrown away. And we asked ourselves how come they were discarded. And probably the reason is that nobody has ever seen it. This is not a place that the designer would step in. And these are actually the forms that are created outside of the mold, created by the craftsman. They were not created with any intended purpose. But yet they have such a transient existence and so beautiful and organic as well. So we start to ask ourselves if we are able to design from this. And what we did was we asked Marcus and Miro, who are the glass craftsmen, to try to blow into one of these most ubiquitous glass mold that we can find in the workshop.
You
must press it for him.
Achso, mocht. shoulder. Gerade. Gut. Hier. Ja. Acht schon schief. Acht. One more.
So we call this collection Clouds. And the idea is that, are we able to design an open-ended question? So what if we start a sketch and we create a form and we sort of pause and leave it halfway and ask the craftsman to imagine the rest of it? And in this case, we're not trying to design a perfect form, but we're trying to design a perfect dialogue between the designer and the maker. So whatever that is at the bottom is defined by the shape that is defined by the designer, and what comes above is the form of what the craftsman imagines. Before we went to this, went on this trip, we also did a lot of research. And I guess for the longest time, glass has always been blown into wood and metal molds. But in the last few decades, there's been lots of advancement in material technology. And one of it is in ceramic and textiles technology. So we found these titanium and glass fiber fabrics that are able to withstand a really high temperature. And that got us thinking that we could do something with it with glass. So we brought these along with us, and we created a mousse with it. So the question we had in our mind was, how stiff was glass? Are we able to press it with our hands, and can we shape it in the most primitive way? And so we created lots of fabric molds, and these are the exploration.
Kan schaut was slip. Release? Ja. Bisschen Luft. Kan jij morgen? Kan jij morgen? Right, once. Don't worry. But it's interesting. More like this, like here. $600.
Okay.
Stop, hey!
No.
Okay?
Okay, good.
Good hospital.
We remove the clips? Okay.
100. Hey, show.
Good. Leave it. Okay? Yeah.
So we call this collection Amorphous Mousse. In some of the fabric molds, we cut a slit, thinking that it will grow out a handle for a vessel, but we got a bubble instead. But the beautiful thing is this dual texture that you get. So what stays within the fabric gets the fabric texture, and what comes out has this beautiful crystalline texture. And the belt one. So these are experiments that we're doing, which we're also trying to evolve into like more objects with a bit more function right now. So what's interesting in the video, you can see the guy with the black sleeve, he's actually Benedict. So he was playing with us the whole time. And we had a lot of fun. Yeah, this is a really big one, we call it the whale. It's really huge. And actually the fabric mold exploded because of the glass weight. And despite trying to define the framework for us to create, it's also important to leave some room for surprises. So when we were trekking the forest, we came to a cafe, a rest stop, and we sat down for coffee. and we saw a little child. She was playing in the snow, and she basically dug her whole face into the snow to taste the snow. And at first we thought, oh, so unhygienic. But that's very Singaporean. But then we're thinking later that maybe the child knows something about experiencing nature. So we thought we all had to try it. So we found the cleanest spot, and then we tried it. And the sensation was amazing. The way the snow melts slowly with a warm breath is a tingling sensation. And we realized that if there was a flavor for winter, this must be it. And so it was really fun. So the question that we were always thinking when we were there is, how can we materialize the years that Marcus and Miro, the glass craftsmen, spent on learning a skill? So how can we articulate that so that people can understand, people who don't know about glass craft? So how we started working with them was 1 year before we went, we were already designing this vase. And the idea of the vase was that Mr. E would lay a copper ring, and then we would send the ring to Germany, and they would blow the glass into the ring. When we arrived there at the glass factory, we realized that in the furnace, they were blowing cobalt blue glass. They had 3 furnaces. One was amethyst, and one was cobalt blue, and one was crystal. It's not something that you can really prescribe because you need a huge quantity for them to burn that amount of glass. So we were very fortunate that they happened to be burning a color that was nice. And these colors were all based on years and years of experimentation. So they do not have like a huge Pantone range. It's all based on just, like for blue, they only have like 3 tones, and cobalt blue was one of them. And so what we realized was how they achieve color is by dipping the glass blowpipe into one furnace of cobalt blue, and if we want a lighter shade, they will take it out and then dip it into the crystal glass. And layer by layer, they coat the glass till they get a bit of blue and a bit of crystal in order for them to get a lighter blue. I have some glass pieces here, which I'll pass around. And in there, you can see clearly that the glass has 2 layers, like a blue and a crystal layer. And so what's interesting is when the glass is being blown, of course, it's red hot. So they have no idea of knowing how much blue they've taken or how much crystal they've taken, which means that every tone of blue is very much based on the intuitive weight that they feel in the blowpipe, in their hands. And so it was like, after so many years of experience, they had this hidden skill in their hands. And that's the glass piece you will see. And so what we come to realize was that blue is really an instinctive weight when it comes to color making in glass. And the best way for us to articulate this skill was to come up with a series of vases in 6 tones, and they were all intuitively created. So we would tell them the first vase would be in crystal glass, and the last one would be in just pure cobalt blue glass. And everything in between is decided by the craftsman. And so this was on experimentation. And one last important point is when you do something like that, always document the process, and don't forget to share it with the craftsmen themselves, because they are the happiest people when they receive our publications and the videos that we've recorded. So I would like to say that as a designer, our work articulate the years that it takes them to master a skill. And in that, communication allows people to comprehend what it means to dedicate your life to learning something. With the recent craft revival, there's been lots of designers who would approach craftsmen thinking that, okay, I'll credit your name, work with me, and maybe work for free, and I'll create these publications, and I'll help you be recognized, and I'll bring you fame. I would like to say, forget it. These craftsmen, they really don't care about these things. They are really humble makers, and most of them are very contented with what they have. And some people think that with design, they are trying to help to save the crafts, but we must be in denial to think that as designers that our work elevate what they do. In actual fact, it is their stories and seeing through their eyes that give some meaning to the work that we do. So for Benedict, he's been running a glass factory that has 450 years of history, like 15 generations. So for him, of course, he's seeing competition from Czech Republic, from the glass factories that's just right across the border. And he's getting a lot less orders nowadays, a lot more limited edition art pieces and less production pieces. But he's not worried about that, because he believes that as long as he continues to do what has been done in the past, that the craft will continue to evolve. And as for Mr. E, he's 64 years old. I think he's given up trying to find an apprentice to continue the craft. His daughters, he has 2 daughters working abroad. And he can jolly well retire and just earn the money from the rental, which is what most Singaporeans do. But he chose not to do that. He chose to just open a workshop every morning at 9 and close at 5, just so that he has something to do. And so back to this image, I guess one of the most memorable moments for me when I was doing this project with the craftsmen was when we exhibited the final collection in Singapore. And Mr. E's daughters came back from Hong Kong and Australia to visit and to see the exhibition. And in the publication that we created, he flipped to this page showing his hands, and he turned to his daughters and he said, "Look at how old my hands are." And look at all the wrinkles. And I think at that very moment that he is able to communicate with his daughters through his skills, I think that was for him the most important, and also the value of our work. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Wendy, for that fascinating insight into glass blowing as well as your work. Definitely opens new perspectives. Does anyone have any questions? Yep. You want to shout it out?
Yeah. For example, we know that for example, the art and design, they share the creative process, and exploration is part of this creative process. For you, what's the boundary between art and design? Because sometimes we believe that design works toward something needs, or like really market-driven maybe, and art is more about self-expression. So what you share here is, where do you believe that there's this line between art and design?
I can't say I know much about art, and this is really our first venture into something like that. And when we were exhibiting it, we also had a hard time trying to place ourselves, whether it's this art or design. But in the end, how I see this process is that they form the seeds of creativity, in which until today we are still trying to develop pieces from those works. And the fact that we were able to create so freely within the workshop without any boundaries or thinking about what is the function or medium of this object really does help in having these pieces created. And then later on, we can start thinking, how can we appropriate them? So, yeah, so I guess they are in between.
Forget my question now. Now I remember. It's ironic, but did you ever consider any of the pieces that you showed us today failures? Because one of the things that I struggle with doing design work is most of the time, unlike what you did, where like you mushed it and it looked great and I couldn't imagine it going wrongly, most of my work is terrible, at least when I look at it. And it takes a lot of hard work to try and get it good. And even then there's a huge struggle when you don't get the positive feedback. You just think it's terrible, it's still terrible, you know? So that's my experience. And when I look at you doing your work, you were like, it's awesome, it's awesome, it's awesome. That's what I got from you just now. So is that true? I mean, is there a lot of like what you didn't like that you didn't show us?
No, actually I showed everything, yeah.
Did you consider any of what you showed us just not bad?
No, but it's funny that what you're saying. I think in this framework, it's easy to say it's awesome. You know, of course, in the framework of a design project where you have constraints, then you have those issues. For instance, with regards to the blue, so what happens is when we're telling them, okay, we want to have some vases in blue, and that was over email. Benedict was like, you have to come to our workshop, you have to see how we do it, then you understand why it's not possible to achieve one single tone. So what happens is sometimes when they are trying to achieve one tone for one designer, they may blow 10 vases and only out of the 10, 5 may hit that right color. And they just discard the rest because they can recycle the glass. It's an ongoing process. And it's for us to say that, okay, that's not a failure, that's actually something interesting, and let's try to showcase that. Yeah. So I guess it's how you look at it, yeah, whether it's a failure or not. And actually we created an explosion in the factory. When we're doing the wood pieces, we came up with this really stupid idea of embedding the wood inside the glass completely. So after it was really difficult to do it, but finally when they finally managed to encase the glass started to expand. And Marcus was like, wow, I've never seen glass expanding at this speed. Because usually at this size, I can't blow it anymore, even with my experience. So, but it doesn't matter, we just put in a cooling furnace. And 10 minutes later, it exploded inside. And the funny thing was, Benedict was like, oh, okay, so now we know what we can't do. Like, he wasn't like, really angry or upset, he wasn't. So it was really fun, yeah. So that was a mistake, but I can't show that because it exploded.
Any other questions?
This isn't much of a question, but like a comment. I really appreciate that you showed all the steps of using those failures and that you're proud of it. And I think that's the big difference between designers and artists is that designers are very obsessed with getting things to turn out the way you want it. You're very clear of how the process is, how we want it to turn out. But what I appreciate from your process is the artist's process is that let's see what happens. And whatever came out, that's art, I think that's where the beauty of the pieces is in the process. Is that let's see what happened. Whatever came out, it's beautiful.
Yeah, because in many ways we are really talking about the method more than the final outcome.
To what extent did the local space, like they had faced the snow and all that, how did that mold the process for you?
I think it's like an analogy. It's like how you have to taste the snow to understand what's winter. It's how we have to go all the way there to be in the context of the workshop, in the environment of the craftsmen, that we can really understand and see through their eyes and then create in that process. So if you ask me to design glass pieces in the confines of my studio without any imagination of how they do that whole process, I think I wouldn't come up with such interesting stuff. Yeah. Sorry.
Just wondering, how do you manage to forge a relationship and then allow Marcus to trust you to do his whole workshop and let you experiment with it and everything? What's the process?
It takes time, yeah. And like what I was telling you before, they don't care about fame or recognition. I think what they care about is respect. Like they feel you're respecting them. So maybe during this 6 days we were there, the fact that we were spending so much time with the craftsmen, and Benedict was really happy because he feels that as a designer, we are going there to work with his workers and making them feel that they are important too. Like the way, it may not be shown in this video, but we actually had a publication and we go around on the last day taking a portraiture of every craftsman, right down to the guy who does the packaging. And even that moment of just standing there with a tripod and a camera, for them, they feel really proud that someone is taking a picture. And then later on, we send the video back to them. So it's always important to go back and keep that contact and send whatever materials you have to them. So when we finally sent the publication to them 5 months later, so we took about 5 months to document what happened in 5 days, Benedict was really, really happy. And after that, the way he talked to us was really different from before. Yeah.
What would be your suggestion to promote craftsmanship in Singapore, to encourage more people to take up being craftsmen?
I think it's to really be sincere in that conversation and be very honest. Yeah. To spend time with them and to understand what they're doing. And it's not just Mr. Yi, there's many other craftsmen that are still around. And it's about keeping that conversation alive. And I guess it's just about not using their face for marketing or what, Yeah.